we were really planning this session, we thought a lot about the call to action and how to move beyond what we do so well in higher education, which is talk about things, to actually start doing some things. So for our last session, which focuses on where do we go from here, next steps, we have a wonderful team to help bring it all home. That team is being led by Janet Tyler from Airfoil Communication, Airfoil Public Relations. Janet is the co-founder and co-CEO, along with Lisa Valley-Smith, of Airfoil Public Relations. Airfoil specializes in technology issues, but as an agency, they're very good at working with clients and helping clients figure out where they want to go and what they want to do. So Janet, who has many, many years of doing this kind of work, is absolutely the best person to be able to lead us in this final discussion. So we have about an hour and 10 minutes with Janet, and she and her team are going to help us figure out where do we go from here. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, this is where the rubber meets the road. We stop talking and we start acting, and hopefully leaving here with some good key messages that we can take out to the market about Detroit. So in front of you, hopefully we have about 10 groups of 10 is what we were shooting for. So if you are sitting at a table with only one or two, maybe look around and see if you could join another table that has a large sheet of paper for our brainstorm. But before we get into actual brainstorming, I did want to refresh everyone about why we are here today, which is, I think as Ken said, we are convening the conversation and facilitating positive news and information about Detroit. And this really has to start with us if we want to change that national conversation. The values of this team and this group working together is that we are nonpartisan, non-biased to our organization or nonprofit. Really, this is about Detroit and Detroit's image, although I think we all agree there's something in it for each of us. If we can start to turn that national conversation towards some more positive news about Detroit. Obviously, we want you all to put your creative hats on as well as your investment hat for Detroit. The strategy all along has really been to look at what is working, right? We've talked about the neighborhoods, we've talked about a new political front moving into Detroit, but we have a lot more work to do before we can really uncover what is working. And hopefully today we will get to some key messages and to some storytelling that will reflect positively upon Detroit. So like any good PR people, Airfoil went just over the last 90 days, it did like a secondary analysis of all of the media coverage that was in the marketplace. I'm not going to bore us all with some of the findings other than at a really high level to tell you that the coverage is increasingly global about Detroit since the bankruptcy. The bottom, and I hate to say that word because we've all talked about, are we at the bottom, where's the bottom? But the negative coverage now seems to be evolving into, can Detroit be saved? How will Detroit be fixed? So the narrative is slightly turning since the bankruptcy coverage, although we've all seen that the negative coverage and some of that stereotyping about Detroit still exists in the national media. But much more work to do in this regard. I do like to tell the story. I'm also born and raised Detroiter. I've been on the founding or part of the executive leadership committee that puts on TEDx Detroit every year. My agency is involved and invested in Life Remodel, which occurs in Detroit. But I was in Munich just a few weeks ago in a cab, and the cab driver said, "Is it true, can I buy a house for $1,000 in Detroit?" Which I just thought, wow, this really is increasingly global what is happening here. Not necessarily a positive thing, although I think he was actually pretty interested in the potential of buying a home, which would be completely unachievable in a market like Munich to buy a home for $1,000 US. So that's kind of the background, but then Matt, or Dr. Seeger, took it a step further and did some primary research with all of us in the room. So you all, or most of us, participated in a SurveyMonkey that he fielded to kind of give us some more data points to kind of lead us into this brainstorm. And I think Paula Silver was saying that, you know, day in and day out, most of us, more than half, 56% in fact, are fielding pretty actively questions and concerns and inquiries from the press about Detroit. So if you are an agency or a nonprofit or on the corporate side, you're there thinking you're doing an interview with a reporter that's probably about your product or service or your nonprofit, and the question about, hey, what's happening in Detroit, what's it like doing business in Detroit, and it invariably comes up in those situations. 85%, actually more than 85% of you, and this was getting to, Mr. Lawrence was talking about the story that runs, the blog or what have you, and then all of the comments. 85% of the people in this room have responded in some way to a negative news story or comment or stereotype that was out in the marketplace. Those are pretty good odds, because we have, in just looking at the Twitter feed, I'm pretty active on Twitter today, I am seeing that there's a lot of reach in this room. And what we want to do is to be able to set up a framework for us all to respond. And pick fights when the coverage is not fair, right? The good news is that most of us are already doing that relatively unaided. So we have the right group of people in the room today. The majority of you also said, okay, if I were to pick a fight, and a lot of times it's more from your own personal point of view. I've done business in Detroit, and you know, you might see something like, and I've never been a victim of crime, or you know, you're more responding on your own personal point of view. There are no real, you know, existing websites or documents or properties that exist that we can all go to. Oh, this story has made me angry. I'm going to go to the, you know, Detroit website and see if I can pull down a messaging doc to refute that argument, whatever that reporter or blogger has made. So you were saying if I had talking points or some resources that I would go to, I would even probably step up more than 85%, which was pretty high. So that tells us that coming out of the creative today, it would be great if we could maybe have an end result. I told Matt, I think we need a phase 2 of this to really get to what those talking points might be. But you all have pretty much said if there was a resource online that I could go to, I would. I guess the good news is 8 out of 10 of us all agree that that Detroit's image and reputation is on the upward trend and that it is improving. So in fact, 78% of us. We all agree that the primary problems with Detroit's reputation today, believe it or not, the tertiary argument was the bankruptcy, only 45%. We all agree that the blight and the crime rate is currently are the top 2 indicators of Detroit's image issues. So we have a little bit more work to do there, but the bankruptcy actually came up 3rd, which we thought was interesting. Although according to the media, that seemed to be the worst part of the coverage, and now it's the, you know, how can Detroit be saved or fixed media cycle that we're in right now. I thought this was also very interesting and worth kind of taking a look at. You know, we asked on those key messages, if you had that set of key messages, what do you think some of those key messages would be? And we are all professional communicators by trade, and the top 3, far and away, were that, you know, pertaining to our automotive industry, the bread and butter of our economy, is that the big 3 are healthy again. This notion of Detroiters being resilient, and that we have a vibrant arts and culture community. So I guess this gets to this, I'm kind of calling it the hipster variable in Detroit, that we have maybe uncovered, but clearly there's some power in that, and we all agree that our artist community could be part of our resurgence. So these are the top 3 messages that all of you selected that you thought had, you know, as we say in our business, has some legs. You know, how do we move some stories around these big 3 topics? And then this completely jumped off the page to me because, you know, the reason why we're spending a half of our work day, we could all be billing clients, you know, reporting in. Monday morning is a very busy time in any business or nonprofit community center or wherever we may be working. But we're all here today because we really care and we're invested in the city. In fact, 97% of you have agreed, whenever possible, sure, I'm going to insert a positive message about Detroit when I'm working with the media or in my day-to-day job. 97%, that's significant. So what we need to do is kind of take the energy that's in the room around this topic and convert it and use that energy, hopefully in what will be a great brainstorm. So Erica from Airfoil has a deck of cards that we have created. They look like this, and she's just going to go around from table to table and ask one person to pick a card out of the deck. And if you could, and if each table could say, what is the card, very loud.
What is the card?
Okay, so the first card is a question mark, so that's a wild card. So I'm going to ask you to pause for just a minute. The next table got. Yep, say it very loud. What is that table there? Another wild card. Wow. Okay, Shelley, what did you get?
Detroit is innovative.
Detroit is innovative. Keep going. We're going to go for 10 of these.
Detroit is resilient.
Detroit is resilient.
Detroit is independent.
Detroit is independent. So these are all brand attributes of our city.
Detroit is strong.
Love it. Detroit is entrepreneurial.
Detroit is authentic.
Authentic. So maybe this, Erica, this table could be one, and then maybe Pat, or either way, and then this could be another one.
Detroit is automotive.
Detroit is automotive, so maybe, if you guys could, okay, that's fine. And then we'll take a wild card.
Detroit is creative.
Detroit is creative. Oh, you got the hipsters.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you have a wild card, which means Detroit is a question mark, that means it's up to you. You guys can pick one of the current brand attributes from the floor, or if you want to write your own, you can absolutely do that as well. So what we'd like for you to do is to come together as a group. Sorry, I'm running out of battery here. And of course, obviously, identify your brand attribute and spend some time thinking about how might we tell that story to an external, say a reporter, for instance. What would be a headline or maybe a dream story that you want to place? What trend does it connect to? Obviously, entrepreneurialism is a huge trend, right? How can we tell that story? And what would be, I'm sorry, I seem to have lost power here. And what would be some of the brand attributes that you would want to tell? So what we're going to do is we're going to take, we're brainstorming already. We're going to break up, take 15 minutes to talk about what that potential headline would be and what would the resources and the spokespeople be that you would need to tell that story about our city. And then what we'll do is each group will pick one representative to kind of at a high level go through your paper. You don't have to use that paper, but it would be great if you would, so we can capture it after we're done with the session. And then we'll present back to our larger group, our findings. All right, so everybody, if you could just kind of turn to the back of the room. Look at that, they're already all standing and organized. This is so great.
Left brainers.
Okay, this is just the left brain, there are no wrong answers. We can just go for it.
So how we looked at the word strong is that we thought rebuilding is strong and resilient. So Detroit rebuild our way through strong ideas, brands, neighborhoods, people, entrepreneurs, families, culture, and history. We looked at individual storytellers that could help tell that story from each of these areas. Do you want to give one of your examples?
Sure. So there's a young lady
out of town, but the Green Garage's clients can then have their people come stay there if they're doing meetings or attending conferences. So it's a resource for their entrepreneurs to continue to grow. So it's not only that they took over this building and turned it into an amazing co-working space, but they're renovating further. And so if it didn't exist in Detroit, they created it, they built it. So that's the strength of our community.
I think one of the things we wanted to look to is our past for building things with our future of building things. So in the past, we are democracy, we are the birthplace of the automobile in terms of manufacturing and building. Now, we've moved to that whole creative class of building where there are a lot of entrepreneurs, but there are also people in the neighborhood who've been there for 30 years, who live in, sometimes on blocks where they're the only house standing, but they've stayed. And why have those people stayed? Because they like Detroit. So some great stories about the strength of the word resilience we used earlier, the resilience of people in the city of Detroit. I mean, that's the best way to show our strength. I mean, to Peter's comments earlier about the storytellers, there's some amazing stories in the city of Detroit, and we want to be able to tell them in terms of the people who come up with ideas. Our strong brands that exist and that are building now, our neighborhoods and communities where there are great stories. The people, like the people in this room, who care enough about the city to come out and learn more about how to tell a story. Entrepreneurs who think in families. You know, we talk a lot about, there's not a whole lot of family conversation about the city of Detroit, but there's so many families who live here. And so we want to include that in the message about our strength, because we build great families here. There are great people who come out.
It's a great point.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in terms of culture, a lot of what's going on now is linked to our culture. We have our own unique brand here in the city of Detroit. We want to maximize that. And then linking back, like I said, to our history. We also came up with the hashtag
Either rebuild Detroit or build in the D.
Build in the D, that's cool. Thank you very much. I love the way that you told discrete stories. That's excellent, thank you. All right, the creative table, please stand up. Please stand up.
All right. We were the creative table, and one of the big things for us was the hipster variable. You can't hear me? I'm sorry.
Much louder.
One of the things we were really talking about was the hipster variable that we've been talking about so much today. And the great thing of creative companies and individuals moving back to Detroit, since so many of them have gone away over the years, and really talking about how getting some momentum with some of the stories, as the last group mentioned, about different creative events around Detroit. And as you tell more of those stories, as Paula mentioned, momentum helps build momentum. So continually telling these different event-driven stories, but also individual stories. So not just focused on one or the other. And activating those on as many social channels as we can, either through YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, any of those things. So anybody else?
Did you talk about a moment in time when Detroit might be viewed as more creative than other cities?
We did. We talked a lot about how there's a lot of movement, momentum of people coming back to Detroit because of the creative culture here, how jobs and creative organizations are moving back to the city. I also talked a little bit about the phenomenon that I'm seeing where 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I tried to recruit students to come to Wayne State, sometimes I had to overcome Detroit. And now it's exactly the opposite. Students want to come here because they view this as a place that's really exciting and dynamic, and there are these incredible opportunities in the city. In terms of the brand attributes, we talked about the space in Detroit. There's room in Detroit to do creative things. There are places where you can go and do a pop-up gallery, where you can buy a house and redo that house in some wild and crazy way. So there are spaces in Detroit where there's really an opportunity. And there are people in Detroit who increasingly are embracing some of these wild and crazy ideas. Well, we spent a lot of time talking about some of the kinds of arts organizations or cultural activities. I spent a little time talking about the Nain Rouge event. I don't know how many of you know about the Festival of the Red Dwarf, which is, boy, it's a fun one. We also have Dally in the Alley, of course. So there are a lot of these kinds of activities which really get at that sort of hipster culture, that really alternative kind of experience. One thing we noted is there's no really good place or resource where all this information is assembled. So some place in terms of driving the story where we can assemble the data, assemble the facts, and begin to build the stories which can really contribute to this idea that Detroit is the place to be creative.
Thank you. Independence. Where are our independents?
We perceive Detroit as independent, and the three things that came up were attributes, trends, and channels. For our attributes, we talked about confidence, undivided, we're self-starters, and we're driven. The trend it's a do-it-yourself type of city. Entrepreneurs, we have a lot of social community where it's this art and culture. We call it's a new way of remixing. As you said, it's a remix of everything together. The different channels, the way we handle it would be, you have a face-to-face, you're building the authentic relationship, and then social media, secondary, you just use that as a strong force. Instead of taking pictures of life, you take pictures of the gardens, of flourishing flowers and vegetables that's happening. You take pictures of the kids active, riding their bike, or the slow roll that happens. You don't catch the thousands of people that are riding down the streets of Detroit. So that's how we kind of handle Detroit as independent.
I like the use of, for every negative picture of the blight, take a positive picture, and there's a lot of social juice in that could be used. That's excellent. Great job. Entrepreneurs. Where are our entrepreneurs? Detroit is entrepreneurial.
Speaking of monitors, do you want to speak?
Ooh, look, overachievers. They have a lot of written.
So I guess what we really were thinking of is what an entrepreneur is. And they're thinkers that are thinking ahead of their time. They're not hipsters. They really are innovating throughout. And so what we think we're doing is that we're a city of self-starters. That's what Detroit is. It's a Detroit small business hub. Detroit's new industry is creativity. So really we are pitching, not that it's growing and it's helping, but this is where it's happening. This is where we want to come when we start a new business. So kind of to feed off what you guys are saying over here, we're also changing the lifestyle. So we're not focusing on the past anymore. Yes, the auto industry was the past and built the city and brought everyone here, but now everyone else is, because clearly that's not so much the case anymore. Even though they're fueling us, we're still providing much more with our own people. So with urban farms, with whatever you want to do, you can do it here, and that's what Detroit Entrepreneurial is. We're going to go through, what are we going through now? Small business success rates. We're going to get some spokespeople. Phil Cooley, Lee Padgett, Pony Ride feeds the small business industry. So we're going to take our local people and just keep feeding the city through entrepreneurs.
Cool. Hashtag self-starter city. That's interesting. I like that.
Or creative industry.
I love it. Great job. Innovators. Where are the innovators? Detroit is innovation.
All right, I'm going to, Detroit is innovative. We're going to all jump in right now. We talked about how we should focus on what's new and original. After all, that's the definition of innovative. New and original. What's new and original? What's going on now that's new and original? And we were talking about the importance of differentiating Detroit from other tech cities, but making sure that we are positioning ourselves as the city to go to, the city of opportunity, right? Where you can create, you love that, and they still fuel our city, they're still here and the foundation of our city, but there's so much more. So what are we still doing really well in Detroit? And then Danielle felt strongly about some of these specific things that we're doing very well.
Okay, I've been put on the spot. We were just coming up with some specific examples here, and I think, you know, one of the things that Steph put up here, why here, is because we had some conversation about, you know, the word innovation specifically relative to the city of Detroit. You know, that we are, that word is particularly keen for us right now because of who we are and because of our history. And so when we look at some of the things that are going on, some of it is not that it's a new thing, you know, eating food and health and wellness and all that. It's just that the way that our take on it now is different. And so, for instance, one example under health and wellness that we thought about was Run This Town Detroit. I don't know how many people have heard of that, but, you know, when the weather breaks, right now here in Cass Tech High School, but when the weather breaks, you can go on Saturday morning to the Riverwalk, you know, in Detroit downtown, and you'll see this huge group of people, and it's massive, that they are running along the Riverwalk, and then after they run, they come back to a spot on the Riverwalk and they exercise. So you see all these people doing calisthenics on the ground downtown, and so something like that is just so pure and organic. You know, bike riding in Detroit, what is it, Detroit Bikes? So these are all examples. People have already talked about the urban farming. You know, one of our thoughts here was not just urban farming, but farmers markets. And that as a place, or all of these as places where people gather and can have shared experiences. When we talk about the mold and how we would get this stuff out, social media was big. But the conversations there encourage people to go do something. So the last little set of phrases that we came up with is attached to it, is that what that says? Own it and do it. And so really about bringing people together for a shared experience.
It's interesting to watch the groups interact. We could have had another adjective there. Detroit is competitive. Between entrepreneurial and competitive and innovative, there was some competition happening there. So if we get to run this again, I'll add competitive based on that experience. That was great. Thank you. Okay, automotive.
Some of our brand attributes are pretty obvious. There's a resilience here in Detroit and within the auto industry. One of the most advanced consumer electronic items you will ever have in your household is your car. So we definitely have that technological innovation behind us as well. It's an industry that's tough. It's an industry that's much maligned and very much misunderstood. But the bottom line is we still know how to make things here. So our desired story are things like America is still made in Detroit. Detroit is the city that put the world on wheels. Design is part of our DNA. And America is made right here in Detroit, and we're designed for the future. So what does it align to? There was some really great research that came out when Shinola was doing their testing about good messaging and what you put on that label to really resonate with people. And Made in Detroit resonates more highly with people right now than Made in America. So let's play that up. Let's make sure that we're aligning properly to that trend. And just like the automotive industry, the city right now is having a second act. You know, it's not like the city's being shy and retiring. There are rooms full of people like this that are getting together and trying to figure out how they make their own difference in the city. In terms of channels that we need to be in, it's really all of it, and I think they've all been mentioned, and social gets thrown out there, broadcast, you know, we're communicators. We want to have good PR for the city, but we need more things like this. We need more face-to-face communication, especially in talking about that automotive sector, because it's so complex. You know, there's a reason why the only patent office outside of Washington, D.C. that the U.S. government has commissioned is here in Detroit. So we need to have these one-to-one conversations to make sure that that message is getting out. Our time future has a little bit of the past, but it really has to look forward and it has to look toward the future. Some of the things that we want to make sure that are out there, the big attention-grabbing graphics, things that, you know, they're really compelling. The infographics are all the rage right now, but you could really have some that just show this is what is on your automobile that was designed here in Detroit, you know, from the actual design itself to the engineering behind the starter that makes your car go. Having trouble reading some of my own writing here, so I apologize. It is a collective group effort, however. We definitely have to take the offensive on this one because everybody thinks they know what the automotive industry is right now. They think it's a very well-defined space, but with the innovations that are going in terms of powertrains, you know, changing the way the basic transmission works from gas to diesel to electric, we're making big changes here. So we need to be on the offensive to take that message to people. And then we really need to start working you know, a little bit more collaboratively. There are common stories that could be told within the PR space for each company and for the suppliers as well. So there are some common message points that could be developed. And working with places like the Michigan Chamber and their Michigan Auto, Mich Auto program, which a lot of those companies are working with. So we need to start, you know, making sure that they're collaborating on messages like this. But then you can do things, you know, Maura was talking about something very creative, like the Moth Story Hour, but having one focus specifically on different parts of the auto sector. And to start having events like that where we're bringing people together to talk about these stories. So we're not waiting for that message to drip to the media and have them tell the story, but we're taking it to them.
It's interesting to talk about, you know, leading. We always say to our clients, we have to lead with our assets, and a few of the tables were saying we have to tell stories beyond automotive, but at the end of the day, Detroit is synonymous with automotive, so where you're taking it is almost redefining automotive as to be more technology or innovation driven, which I think is very cool and has a lot of potential coming from a tech person. So awesome. Resilient folk.
Right here. And I think it's interesting that I think every group that reported out so far used the word resilience. Did you notice that?
Yes.
And I think that's also very appropriate because what this city really is. As a brand, when we talk about resilience, we talk about the people of this community being innovative, entrepreneurial, a community that overcomes obstacles and shows pride in the deed. When it comes to the storyline, we thought it was just simply, we believe in the comeback city of Detroit, and on a personal note, that people can say, I can personally make a difference here, and we will work together to make that happen. And I can barely read my writing. Perseverance through obstacles. We're more than just a bankrupt city. We are much more than that. And we're also more than an automotive city. We're more than so much of what our proud past has been, because of where we really are going in the future. When it comes to trends and aligning with trends, we just felt the terms comeback, city, and reinvention were appropriate. On a channel, our people offer unique individual stories and will share their Detroit pride. In the moment of time, we think that now more than maybe ever, there are opportunities to reinvent ourselves, and that we really are the next comeback is whatever it's going to be. Similar to what the automotive comeback was years ago. Before that, the furnace comeback and all that. We're coming to that next level of whatever we're going to be. On the story, we think it really is about resilience. We think it's about community pride. We need the facts, though. We need to be able to combat comments about blight and crime with accurate facts. And the I need to we us, we feel the community is engaged, that we are all Detroit. We're one collective Detroit, and we need to really communicate that everybody has a part in telling this story. Offensive or defensive strategies, really both, depending on the situation, and we need to be prepared to be both offensive and defensive. When it comes to social media, we think it's really about redirecting the conversation, really toward more of the truth. We all know about the negatives that we see, and And we need to be prepared on an individual basis and collectively to balance that out accurately. When it comes to collaboration, we really want to see the doers to work together on a joint, mutually beneficial message that really gets across what we really are. That's really
Great. I love those notions of perseverance and reinvention, I think are critical as getting into the stories. We need to really find those stories of resiliency. I mean, beyond automotive, which is important in our industry. I think that's excellent. Okay, authentic.
We're the authentic table.
Yes, you are.
I'll kick it off here. But authentic kind of led us to a couple different stories, but all tied in to passion. People, passion, a purpose. Detroit allows you to follow that passion regardless of industry, regardless of what your creative juice is. It's doing something positive, being happy with where you live, and keeping it real. Detroit has to work for a living, so that's what we're doing here. And it's interesting because I feel like authentic kind of takes on a lot of the different other brand attributes here, like strong and creative, and it allows you to be independent and entrepreneurial. It's the unexpected entrepreneur. So the trends that we're aligning this with are DIY, and more recently, thanks to somebody who went to South by Southwest at our table, DIT, do it together. So our channels that we're telling the story through is anything visual, whether it's broadcast or social media on Instagram or whatever, and anything experiential, which is also visual, if we're bringing people to the city and they're walking around and experiencing it and seeing it for themselves. And the moment in time is now. We talked about this a lot, and we can't really put a definitive time frame on this. It's not like GM where it's like pre and post bankruptcy. It's always changing and always improving, always evolving. So with our DIY theme, it's kind of like a before and after and then and now. And so the people that we're going to use for this are not the usual suspects like Dan Gilbert or whoever, but it's the people on the streets doing the work in the nitty-gritty, being featured in front of us. And that's how Detroit is going to be authentic to the rest of the world.
Okay, our wild card table. I know this is a wild card table because that's where they started. So what did you select?
Well, I feel like we selected pretty much what everybody here selected.
great.
So our word is Detroit is yours. And when we started getting to the social media part, we thought the acronym is DIY. Well, do it yourself. So do it yourself, Detroit is yours. And really we talked about everything everybody talked about here. We talked about the entrepreneurs being a city of starters, the innovation fueling our city, the strong green garage and Rachel's of the city, and the automotive that we know how to make things, and the resilience, I can personally make a difference, and we're one collective. So it just really kind of tied into our brand attribute, which we tied in with Peter's. It's about people, and it's about emotion, and it's about connecting with that emotion that I think just was everywhere around here. So, and the trends was, in the business. I think it's kind of, that part's a little bit obvious. We felt that all the channels were open to this and that we could capitalize on now, but then also the 313 birthday, the September homecoming, and that it was a thing that which had legs. And that our spokespersons would be difference makers, not just the Dan Gilberts, but it would be the regular people like they talked about with the authentic, so that it would be a little bit of everybody. So how does it change the we into us? If you drop the Y, you have ours. So Detroit is a collaboration, and yours, and the city really is all about its people, and we felt it was mainly an offensive stance. Anything else? Okay.
Excellent. Detroit is yours, friends ours. I love that. Okay, we get one more wild card.
So we came up with Detroit is fun. And the tagline that was brainstormed around that is let us raise your expectations. And so a lot of things, to your point, discussed here sort of come into play with what we picked up. Detroit is fun with its food, music, entertainment, sports, traditions such as St. Patrick's Day, opening day, the counterintuitive opportunities, the pop-ups, the indie culture, the vacant lots in the communities where people are setting up dinners and having a community-wide dinner, the art movement and the artists that are here in Detroit, the historical aspect, the nitty-grittiness of the city, sort of the feeling of a freedom to do, the innovation of the city. There's opportunity, the realness of the people, how that's fun. There's no pretenses. People are real here. And sort of what's surprising about the city and what you'll find. And then how it's international and global. And what we sort of talked about too is what would we want to see the headlines be that next news cycle or the next day. And some of the headlines that came up is, it's our time now. Experience Detroit. I didn't know I could do this in Detroit. So I don't know if we have any other shared comments. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So this is really just a very first step, right? We had a lot of presentation this morning, and I guess today was our opportunity to literally dip our toe in the water and I guess in a good way get our hands dirty with this stuff and figure out how to best tackle it. But I think it would be good to maybe just for a moment have a few minutes of free-form dialogue here. We have just a few minutes of, is there a personal takeaway that you're leaving here today that you feel, is a call to action for yourself? Is there something that maybe you uncovered today that that really triggered for my business or for what I'm doing that you'd like to share, or an idea? And I think at this point, what I've already said to Dr. Seeger is we really need a phase 2 for this to really get to this part and figure out how does that messaging book or online resource get developed and who's really going to take ownership. I think the answer is it's all of us, but getting organized for that is a whole other kettle of fish. But maybe just start with, does anyone have a personal call to action? Something simple that you said, I didn't know that before this morning, and now I'm going to do that. Yes?
Hi, I'm Claire Pfeiffer. I used to be the editor for Model D, managing editor for Model D, and now I'm editor of XD.com, ISIDI.com. And I would say one thing for all the PR people in here, one of the things I used to do at XD, or at Model D was, I was an editor, I read all the stories, and at some point I had to ban people from writing, this is a hidden gem, or this is a hidden jewel. So they're not, you can find them, they're right there. So when I was listening to someone talk about the conversation being about saving Detroit and that whole, conversation being dominated by this idea that the city needs saving or
fixing.
It kind of plays into that. These things are here, you just write about. You don't even have to say they're hidden. And then the other thing was that when you talk about entrepreneurism and revitalizing the city, the stories the other thing that I had stopped was we can't start every single story with despite the economy or despite the economic downturn, someone is doing something. It's like, no, they're just doing it.
Right.
It's not despite the economy, they're just doing what they do. So I guess the idea is just keep that message out there that things are happening all the time. It's not despite anything, it's not hidden, it's just Detroit.
Love it. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. I think kind of going off that, our table was authenticity, and I was thinking, looking at all those attributes, and I think it can be dangerous to think that Detroit became innovative or entrepreneurial when Phil Cooley moved in. I mean, a lot of these things have been happening for a long, long time, and there are a lot of businesses in the city that have been succeeding for a very long time. And so, hopefully, one thing that we can do is use this increased spotlight to also champion some of those people who've been here for such a long time and are really, stayed before and did this work before Detroit was cool.
So not starting with, ever since Phil, I like that. Yes.
Can I actually
absolutely, yes.
In my book, I actually make that point because and several people have said that. And there's a guy named Larry Mungo, African-American businessman, who's been here a long, long time. And there was a great quote that I found of his. He said, look, a lot of people are saying that, look, we got all these young white kids coming back into Detroit, and that, you know, there was some consternation around that. He says, look, they're filling gaps. There was a time when the white people fled from Detroit and the African American community flowed in and they filled in those gaps. He said, look, it's the reverse thing. It is the pendulum coming back, where people are now sort of filling gaps. And I think that is an interesting point. And I think, you know, if anyone is guilty of making too much of Phil Cooley, it's probably the people in this room and the people who write about it. He's just doing it. And that is actually going back to what you said. It's like, it's just people doing it. There's a great acronym that somebody just shared with me the other day, JFDI, just fracking do it. So yeah, so I think that is it. But that was a very good point about it. It's not just, it didn't begin with Phil Cooley.
Christina.
I think what humbled me this morning is how many people in this room continue to carry the work of Detroit. And I think the power in this room is enormous to not only do good, but to change the local narrative, which I think is worse than the national narrative right now. One of the things that we learned with Shinola, because there have been journalists coming in from all over the world, wanting to spend 1 and 2 and 3 days here and doing good stories, but when they want to put a Shinola person in front of the train station, we've started saying no. It's inappropriate. It's not appropriate to the story of why Shinola came here. And so that kind of room form that keeps, you know, pumping out these worldwide banners, I think all of us have a role to play not to allow that.
Yeah, that idea in the back there, that's just, thank you, well said. That idea in the back for every negative picture, you know, get a group together that's going to commit to posting a positive picture to combat that. I think it's interesting. I'm not sure about the execution, but I think there's a seed there. In the burgundy in the back? Yeah. Ms. Strong.
One of the things I wanted to say is, besides my background in public relations, is that I spent a number of years in community development and kind of served as like an advocate for that industry, running the trade association. Went to DC, went to other cities, looked at how they were communicating about their neighborhoods, and one of the coolest things I saw was a neighborhood in Washington, DC, 14th and U. And one of the cool things about that is they took what was there, the mom and pop barbershop that had been there for 20 years, run by an older African-American man, and right next to that, they put a shoe store called Wild Women Wear Red, which I couldn't resist on it. So the point there is, you've got young, creative class entrepreneurs side by side with existing community organizations. And one of the things I think gets lost in the PR conversation about the city of Detroit, to the point that Peter made about the book, is that there are existing businesses that are there in neighborhoods still surviving, serving that community base. And we can't forget about those in the message. I think, you know, when you see things like that horrible Anthony Bourdain piece, all they focused on was the new, or the dilapidated. They went for poverty porn versus the really cool things that were traditional and old in the city. And I think it's a mistake for the city of Detroit to ignore that part of history, because automotive isn't all there is. There's also the people who've been dwelling in those neighborhoods, surviving, running businesses, and keeping commercial strips like Illinois, Grand River, and Jefferson going. And so I caution us to make sure we tell all sides of Detroit's story when we do.
One more. Yes.
So the one thing that we all do in this room is integrate what we do. We take all of these disparate things going around that we all talked about in our own way, and we find a way to make them relevant to other points. And I think that's what this group can do. Because when I look at the resources that I could have at my fingertips, you know, I like Opportunity Detroit, you know, because I think it's really good from a branding standpoint, but I also like the hub in terms of content generation and being able to push that out. So I think we need to almost look at like a Team Detroit type of setup where we bring together all the different points that are doing that into some coordination so that it can move forward, so that we're talking about, we're producing good content, but we're making sure that Opportunity Detroit has some say into this in terms of how this spreads out into the channels that they're working in. That's the only way that I think that this is gonna work. Otherwise, we're just gonna have a lot of commotion that we're confusing as motion. And that's the biggest thing. And I deal with it every day of what I look at. There's any number of opportunities that we can go out and tell great stories about Detroit. And we just need to take advantage of that.
It's really moving to the execution, to this laundry list of stuff that, as PR communicators, is what we would do for our client or our companies that we work for, that are going to be part of the next step, whatever that looks like. But before I step down, I do want to just take a minute and thank Dr. Seeger and Wayne State University for bringing us all together today to start important conversation. We have just dipped our toe in the water here today, so looking forward to next steps, and I'll turn it back to Dr. Seeger.
Thank you very much, Janet and Airfo, for bringing your considerable skill in process facilitation to this problem. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. This has really been a wonderful morning. I'll have to think hard about PRD 2.0, because I think my staff will have something to say about that, but obviously there's a lot of good work to do here. The idea of the Team Detroit coordinating effort is obviously critical to moving forward, and we will certainly take that suggestion, Bill, and see what we can do in terms of working that. The question of developing talking points and stories, looking at branding, looking at messaging, all of those things I think come from coordination. One thing I say in crisis communication is consistency of message is key. Consistency of message is key. And if we can have more consistency in our messaging, if we can leverage synergy in this process, we will be much more effective. So I want to thank you all again for coming. We always like to have people on campus, and it's great to see you all. Thank you again, and we will be following up. Look for us on Facebook. Please find that Facebook page and make some comments about the session today. Thank you very much.